recognizing that the owner, you and I, of our data needs to be very clearly established. We have a penumbral right to privacy in the Constitution, and I think in the United States, it's not a difficult stretch to say I also have a penumbral right to my data, that I own it, and
Yeah.
that the Amazons, the banks, the universities, the governmental units are gatherers of that data and might even credential some of that, like a driver's license or a passport or a university degree or a digital certificate of accomplishment. The issue now is, where should that be stored? Should that be stored just on the proprietary monolithic computers that these organizations operate? No, it's my data. That's my credential. I've earned it. That's my driver's license. I've been granted that.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. So joining me today is Dennis Hill. Think engineer meets professor meets fearless fixer. He is leading IHRIM's comeback tour and turning that legacy association into what I think is a modern day hub for HR and tech. So I'm really excited about IHRIM. We've been working a lot with them, and Dennis has kind of been leaning into partnerships, and we are one of those partners. So very happy to have you back on the show, Dennis. Welcome.
I'm thrilled to be here, Teri. Thank you again. And as always, I love what we're doing with Sapient Insights Group.
Yeah, it really is the right thing to do. And I love your mission and the way that you guys are working with HR technologists and practitioners and people who, this it's becoming ever more critical, right, in today's environment. So I was hoping, we talk a lot about HR tech. We just came back from HR Tech, the conference. We learned a lot there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. But you and I have also been talking about sort of Web 3.0 and blockchain. Like, we've heard all about AI. AI has been the big topic, but there's some underlying capabilities and some tech that's happening behind the scenes. And I think people are scratching the surface. They just don't know exactly what it means for them. And so we thought we might have a conversation and bring people up to speed on what those things are and how they're impacting HR. Does that sound like a good plan?
That sounds great. It,
All
it starts
right.
with, yep, it starts with a nice discussion wrap of what happened that week in Vegas, because I hope what always happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas. I thought some great stuff came out of that.
Yeah, there definitely was some great stuff. How was HR tech for you guys? I thought you threw a nice little party and I loved the Star Trek theme.
Yep, the future is now. That's our tagline under our rebranding of our media division, which of course publishes Workforce Solutions Review quarterly. We've had it branded as that magazine now since I think 2009. And as you already alluded to, IRIM, as I don't know if it's a comeback tour. I guess it depends on your perspective. I like to look at it as our second chance around the winner's circle. We were really a group of technobobs, right? I don't want to use the term geeks or tech gurus or anything. So just people who were a bit strange, a bit peculiar from Canada and the United States who got together, that November or so in San Francisco back in 1980 and formed the International Association of HR Information Management. I come along almost 40 years later as an invited member to the board, really semi-retired, but bringing with me an exhaustive amount of small, medium-sized business experience, including taking a company public and developing software and handling personnel and systems for mergers and acquisitions at that scale thousands of people, and working in a group of companies that were privately held, as I said, with a different flavor on what IRIM represents. It was really interesting because I'm from the Midwest, which means, you know, I never heard of IRIM. IRIM was very concentrated on both coasts. And IRIM, as part of its mission to its members, used to run a conference every year with a fairly sizable trade show. That sort of dissipated in the last decade as other organizations came forward with their own versions of HR tech trade. And by the time I was on the board, IRIM had really ceased doing those shows. I think the last one they officially did was 2017 in Toronto. Well, I don't think COVID was too soon or too late in terms of what it had in forcing us to rethink strategies around the world. And my background, of course, was in partnerships and alliances from back in the days when I was a professor to also being a business owner. And reality for the board was recognizing that we need to focus on our wheelhouse and we need to do better through strategic partnerships of value. One of those, of course, which has long existed for 28 years, if I'm counting the number right, is with Sapient Insights Group and its predecessing organizations in producing this annual survey. What a terrific opportunity it is for us, and what great value you provide in that service every year, giving that insight into what the market trends are. So the same thing happened 3 years ago, maybe a little over that. Leanne and Rebecca from HR Executive reached out and said, "Hey, we'd like you to come on board as a partner for HR Tech." And that wasn't the opening conversation point, but it was certainly within the next two or three points. And of course, I speak the alliance partnership language very effectively. And here we are, 3 years now as a co-organizer and co-promoter for the event, giving the most professional development units you can get for your certifications, alongside our partners. I don't view SHRM or HRCI as competitors. I view them as complementary associations. And we're all working together to really advocate for and elevate the HR profession. So, what did Vegas represent this year? Another opportunity to elevate that profession by visiting the startups. I love the startups. I can't spend
Yeah.
enough time with the startups, but listening to what the big players are doing, some really great sessions. And of course, the honoring and the award ceremonies with HR icons, our own Master Key Awards, your recognition of the vendors that are out there. And the I guess the excitement and the momentum doesn't stop. Whereas it used to. It used to stop. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing IRIM brings to the table with the HR executive partnership is that they have this big event here, Amsterdam, Singapore, and then it usually just kind of fizzles out. There's a lot of buzz for a week or two, where IRIM is there every week offering webinars and conversations, engaging our members on our platforms, putting out the quarterly magazine, and doing what we can to engage that again, that much larger peculiar community of technobobs, the HR tech people in this field. So if I still sound like I'm excited from the receptions and the sessions, I am. I'm still trying to process that adrenaline to this, what, week and a half afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to see you guys at the front door. Like I just, this is I think a great organization, and if you don't know about it or you haven't heard about IRIM, I encourage you to go check it out, because I think as somebody in the HR field, and particularly if you're in, more focused on HRES and the technology and the future of work and work tech, that this is a place to be, because you're going to find people who are also interested in those things and have ideas, and that they want to share, that I think are going to be very interesting, especially as we continue to see a lot of change. What was there anything big you learned at HR Tech this year? What was your take on how AI was presented this year?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm mindful of the fact that you see these classic car shows in the lobby or in the parking lots of stores, McDonald's, community parks. and you see the classics. And they're all polished up, beautifully painted. The hoods are up so you can see their wonderful engines. So I view HR tech very much the same way. And in some cases, I still see classic cars because I wanted to go and explore what was under the hoods. At the end of the day, where technology is emerging and what is imminent in Web3 is that we're not going to be able to patch our way to Web3 like we have to Web2. Everything from the PC revolution through the mid-range computers, through the middleware systems, back-ended by large servers, which are mainframes for the most part, at AWS and things like that, require a completely different architecture, one that's built with security at the core, one that's built with transaction speeds that can scale to large numbers and manage, in our case, global workforces, and one that provides real-time information at the point of data capture or data need, which is at what we call edge computing. So I went through and I looked under a lot of hoods and I spent time kicking tires. And I have to say that the hardest thing for me to extract, and understandably, most of the people in the booths are marketing and salespeople. They're not technical people. I met probably a handful of product managers that really understood their technology. And when confronted with the question, tell me your roadmap, give me your roadmap to Web3, it was crickets. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't try to answer. It's just I wasn't looking for crickets. I was looking for
Yeah.
substantive answers. And what I found was, well, we're doing this with AI. Okay, well, AI is an external function and you're patching it onto the system by, accessing APIs, extracting data, maybe doing some ancillary processes, replacing spreadsheets or things you're doing manually. That wasn't what I was looking for because true Web 3 at the end of the day embeds the AI within the software. It is the software. And that I saw absolutely no glimpses of at all. And
Yeah.
that's even among the startups.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be a developer. Look, I hope I don't date myself here. A lot of people won't even know what this means, but I learned programming at the dot prompt, right? Like I was programming in DBase and stuff like that back in the day. And I'm not a big techie now. Like I've gotten so far away from some of the sort of real deep dive tech stuff. I have nightmares about some of the acronyms, but at this point, I think, Web3 and the whole idea of blockchain are still pretty abstract to a lot of people, especially even people that are kind of living in the HR tech trenches. Can you sort of give us an explanation of how you see what these technologies mean for the future of work? Like, how do they fit into the picture? And I think you started on that with how this sort of wraps around AI.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we're used to writing applications, first of all, using some sort of object or procedural languages, whether it was C or Java or SQL instructions, SQL. We've all cut our teeth on that, some with older languages. In the Web3 environment, your architecture is built on distributed ledger technology, DLT. We commonly refer to this first generation of DLTs by their architecture, which is blockchain, a series of blocks in a linear chain where they're encoded or encrypted, referring to itself and to its predecessor and to the next chain element, the next block in the chain. And so as you assemble those, you can recreate a data record, an employee record, a resume, doesn't really matter. But each one of those blocks compose an element or a portion of that document, that record. And in a decentralized or distributed world, those blocks do not have to reside on the same hard drive. They can exist on farms all around the world, on different nodes all around the world, making that architecture extremely resilient and tolerant of faults and anything except a breakdown of the network. But even the networks are fault tolerant today. So when you're building your database in DBase or RBase, I go back to those days too, and Oracle, you create these tables with these columns and then you populate them, and that's your record. It looks very much like a spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
In blockchain, is very much the same way. You define the records, and instead of imposing them into a fixed table, you create them in a distributed ledger, just like a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet's a ledger, except this ledger has the ability to be broken into many pieces and scattered around the world. Now, that blockchain is like the basis of Bitcoin and many other common cryptocurrencies that we understand. And that area of technology we call fintech or finance technology. We call it in our field HR tech. It just doesn't sound as good as fintech, right? Her tech. I don't know. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Not as
But
exciting.
we could, and it actually sounds gendered, doesn't it? Gender's her tech. It's her tech. No, it's not his tech.
That would be okay.
It's our tech. Maybe what we do is put an O out there in front of the HR, but I think Oracle would like that too. Or,
Yeah.
our tech.
Our
But
tech.
there's other architectures, and most people don't know that. And they also don't know that the computation of each one of those blocks takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time, which is why we're seeing the creation of these large data centers, not just to process AI applications, but also to create these very large and encrypted architectures that the software really resides on. So the architecture that I'm referring to and that I talked about in Vegas are DAGs, or what's called directed acyclic graphs. Imagine the blockchain is linear, chain, just a chain of blocks, to a web design now where the blocks are actually interconnected through multiple links. So you get a web type of design. These are DAGs and Merkle DAGs. And what's really interesting about DAGs is that they are 1,000 times, 10,000 times faster to compute the next block than a blockchain. A blockchain might take, well, it could take seconds to compute the next block, whereas I can compute 10,000 blocks in a DAG in a second. So now we've scaled the performance to a level with, again, an alternative distributed ledger technology that really is necessary for building products. You know, I guess the way to look at it is cryptocurrency, good start, great way to cut our teeth, get people familiar with the technology, scare most of people away because they don't understand it or they think it's vaporware. Oh, the blocks will go away overnight, or what happens when the system goes down. That none of that applies. But here's the beauty of it. In order to break into one of these blocks, one of these elements, whether you're in a DAG or you're in a blockchain, there's a 1 in 15 trillion chance of breaking that. And even if you broke one, you'd still have to break at least 30% of them in order to compute enough of the data, gather enough of the data, or expose or breach enough of the data in order to steal it. So it's not possible. This offers that underlying central security foundation of future applications, which we have missed for 60 years. Security's always been an add-on. Oh, just buy this malware preventer, buy this virus preventer. Oh, don't worry about the ransomware. Oh, we got hit with ransomware.
Yeah, and it's
now
completely out of control right now. I mean,
it is.
everybody's been impacted in some way about that. So
So
you
we now have a
mentioned,
solution. We now have a solution to that,
yeah,
and a commercially viable mechanism besides blockchain that gives us that level of security. But that now becomes the architecture. How you, just like you defined your database, you now define your blocks in your
yeah,
new distributed ledger technology. So the chain, or the DAG, the web, becomes the architecture. Not the hardware vendor, not even the operating system,
yeah,
because that material can exist anywhere around the world. And all you need is the user interface, the user application, which could be web-based, it could be native app on your pad or your phone, accessing that data all in real time at the edge. That gets us to edge computing. Now, what's the logic in all of this? If you were an Oracle developer or you were an R-based, D-based developer, you had scripted languages. Okay. In Web3, that scripted language is now the next step beyond agentic AI. If you've worked with AI to date and you've done any kind of prompt engineering, it's not unlike playing around with Google inquiries. Some are very good at getting the answer
Mm-hmm.
by a Google search, some are not. The dangerous thing is everybody thinks now that they have Google that they're smarter than what they really are. So they just kind of have this delusion, I'm smart, I'll just Google it, right? Or people get a little annoyed with people always asking them questions. Why don't you go Google it? It's become such a part of our vernacular. The same thing with AI. If you're a good you can be a great prompt engineer or a terrible prompt engineer, you're going to get different results. So prompt engineering is not the type of skill that everybody needs to have, and probably won't achieve much better than they've done at Google searches. But prompt engineering is what you use in order to create the self-modifying applications in AI using agentic tools today that are really autonomous. They run by themselves. And you
Yeah.
embed that becomes now your language under the hood on top of this blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think, the idea that we could write our own code with, and this is already happening, right? I mean, people are writing applications with, just straight up English on ChatGPT or whatever. So yeah, it's getting democratized for sure. You mentioned the decentralization of data, and I think that, that's one of the promises of blockchain is sort of decentralizing that data ownership and employees owning their own data, like that data goes with them. And I think about one of the problems that we've always talked about with respect to HR tech and now has become, a big issue or a big challenge with AI is we don't have good data in a lot of these organizations. The data's not clean, right? Or the data's incomplete. So I'm thinking it, is one of the use cases of blockchain and, can we bring that down to the level of I, as an employee, own my own data. It follows me. I'm managing my own data. I know it's clean, whatever's going into the system. Is this a positive or a plus for the future of AI? Does it matter?
As that doesn't matter kind of hangs out there like a cliffhanger at the end of a season and can't wait for the next one. So let's start with the fundamental lack of codifying who owns our data. That's really the problem. Until we see a federal law that is also portable and applied in other countries, and I'm not talking GDPR, there's some
Yeah.
restrictions in what you can do with the data. I'm talking about with a very clear data owner's bill of rights. And I've done a lot of interviews on this over the last decade to the extent that even working with my colleague out of Australia, John Macy, on forming the consortium DEHR, which was our effort to put together a decentralized HR consortium, working with associations, HR associations in countries, employers around the world, and governmental units, recognizing that the owner, you and I, of our data needs to be very clearly established. We have a penumbral right to privacy in the Constitution. And I think in the United States, it's not a difficult stretch to say, I also have a penumbral right to my data, that I own it. And
Yeah.
that the Amazons, the banks, the universities, the governmental units are gatherers of that data and might even credential some of that, like a driver's license or a passport or a university degree or a digital certificate of accomplishment. The issue now is, where should that be stored? Should that be stored just on the proprietary monolithic computers that these organizations operate? No, it's my data. That's my credential. I've earned it. That's my driver's license. I've been granted that. So these need to be stored on your personal distributed ledger.
Yeah.
Call it a blockchain or whatever. But we need a law that says that. And unfortunately, I'm going to call it big marketing, because when you talk about big tech, big pharma, big government, all this stuff, ultimately it's the exchange of information and the gathering of everything about you that they're making a lot of money and gaining a lot of insights from. So we need that first and foremost. We need a federal law that says I own my data. From that point, everything else, the house of cards that the current e-commerce world of sharing and exploiting our data falls apart, because now they would be required no longer to store your information on their monolithic systems and utilize it opaquely without your permission or without your site, to now storing all that information on your blockchain. And as a credentialing authority, there's nothing wrong with that. I actually got an award for software that does this back in 2021. This was very innovative at the time. It was blockchain based, and it gave people the opportunity to access and manage that information. Imagine a very simple scenario. I'm injured. I am not in my locale. I'm not even near one of the network hospitals that my healthcare is through. I end up going to a different emergency room, and I have the wherewithal, or the emergency room has the wherewithal to say, hey, I need access to your medical records. Well, today that's HIPAA sign-offs, and even the best EHR systems like Epic and others haven't mastered a universal or ubiquitous distribution of your healthcare records. So where does it reside? It should reside on your blockchain. And all you'd have to do is give read access now to that entity. They just send you a request, a transaction like we do every day with PayPal or any other transaction. You give them read access to your medical records, and they now have read access to it. Oh, by the way, they're going to create medical records about you too. Great. I'm going to give you write access to this new network folder on my blockchain, and you can post all your stuff there. Now, that sounds complicated, but actually, it's far more complicated to do it any other way by the standards we've set over the last 60 years with data.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing here is it's yours. You control it. If you want to give people access to your shopping history from Walmart, Kroger, Amazon, and wherever else, you can do that, and maybe even sell it for yourself.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if I'm excited or scared about that, to be honest, like, having all of my information in this one bundle. But at the same time, like I'm still going to doctor or dentist or eye doctor offices today and having to sit there and fill out a form. Like, seriously? And the same goes, in business in some cases, especially smaller businesses, right? They don't
Right.
necessarily have the same capacity, but a lot of these new tech companies and smaller tech companies are picking up the slack there. I know, most of our stuff is done, we're a small company, but most everything we do is through our, HR system. So people aren't filling out paper, but yeah, it's still
Well,
out there.
and all this data sharing was great, and part of, I guess, call it a Faustian deal, and people who aren't familiar with Faust can go do their Google it. They make their own Faustian deal with all of these, the big seven or whatever tech companies are out there, and they sign away their permissions to do this, which was great when we were getting tremendous services for free. But
Yeah.
now we pay 100 or $129 a year to one of those big seven just to get 2-day delivery and maybe some priorities, but they're still
Yeah.
capturing your data and marketing you. So I think the subscription model has taken over the free model. And I think the argument of giving up your personal information in order to have, quote, free access is bogus. I think that's part of the slippery slope, or the, how do I say this, a little bit more imaginative. Oh, it's a house of cards built on a foundation of sand. And
Yeah.
and that's all going to come down, because if we don't get control of it, Terry, if we don't insist from our legislators of having a fundamental right, penumbral or otherwise, to our own data and maintaining that ourselves. I mean, you can certainly contract with a third party, let them handle that if you're not tech savvy. But I think today pretty much everybody has a smartphone. We've adopted these technologies. The security is there in wireless. The emerging tech is out there in fintech and blockchain. There's no reason why we can't own that data and control it with today's technology. Heck, the technology was available 6, 7 years ago when I first developed this app. And I'm not pushing the app, by the way. That company is long sold off. The intellectual property's gone. But I can sit on my soapbox and say it works. And if we don't do it, now you mentioned a word earlier that I did not. You mentioned democratization. Democratization we could spend a whole nother hour talking about property ownership through tokens. I don't have to buy a home, right? Home ownership today, big problem. How about a fraction of a home? How about being able to afford maybe a home that I don't live in, but I have the opportunity to invest some of my money into a community by buying a fractionalized portion of a home. Now that's democratization. That's economic democratization in a crypto economy. And that's where we're headed. So, big transition point, not getting political. Biden administration in favor of a digital currency. Our friend in the White House these days in favor of cryptocurrency. Two completely different things, especially in light of what we see going on with digital ID
Yeah.
and social credits in the UK, of all places, right?
Yeah.
Where we watch the truckers in their anti-vax stand in Canada have all their digital accounts shut off by the government. Look, I am by no means a revolutionary, but I also fundamentally was raised in what I would call classical education, K through 12, that actually produced educated graduates, unlike today, that were taught that government serves the people.
Yeah.
That's why this is a fundamental issue of data ownership, because the government, if it has control of all your information, there is no freedom. Okay.
Yeah.
They can shut things off. The beautiful thing about crypto is that it can be regulated to some extent, but there's no back door into your crypto. There's no back door
Yeah.
into your files, and those are all immutable. But with digital currency, like the previous administration was in favor of, they can basically flip the switch off and control you. One other aspect is the crypto economy, and I will do a plug for this. I do have a book coming out in a couple of months that lays out what we see unfolding in front of us right now as a quantum financial reset. And we hear about XLM and other types of cryptos that are out there and US stable coins and monetizing the balance sheet of the US Treasury. By the way, not the Federal Reserve. And we see a lot of bellicose conversations going on between the federal government administration and the Federal Reserve, because in a crypto economy, you don't need a bank. All the transactions are peer to peer.
Yeah.
So the idea of a central bank involved in managing cash flow and things like that really go out the door and go out the window completely. And so we're seeing this unfold. I do have a book coming out on it. I'm not sure what the final title will be, and I really don't want to leak it at this point. But we'll just say that I've taken the last 25 years and looked at two very remarkable people, both in business in their own regards, and then one who went into politics and the other one who continues in business. And I suggest that what we see unfolding is the result of every scenario being computed for the current administration and maybe the next two through an
Yeah.
AI, a proprietary AI. And that's the reason why we don't see too many mistakes being made, if any at
Yeah.
all.
Oop, looking forward to that.
It's fictional.
Yeah. Well,
Fictional based on
that's
reality.
even more interesting. That'll be fun. Yeah, because I was thinking about, that last night, and I love my Chick-fil-A app because I can just boop boop, order what I want, pull up, and hey, it's my order. And I pulled up last night behind the car in front of me was paying cash. And, I was like, I totally respect that. Like, I still like carrying cash. Like, I'm not sure I want my cash to go away. Can crypto be that cash? Maybe, right? Can that become the replacement? But it was sort of this, like, I'm so used to just everything on the card, like, just throw it on the card, pay it at the end of the month or whatever. But I still like the freedom of, if I want to whip out a $20 bill, I can do that, right?
Did you try it in Vegas?
I did not.
It doesn't work. We went to go see the Wizard of Oz at the Sphere. And by the way, your
And you couldn't
listeners,
pay cash?
you got to listen to this. Your people need to, if you do nothing between now and revising your bucket list, and this is so shameless because I love tech, go see the Wizard of Oz in the Sphere. It is a life experience that you'll never have in a conventional, even a surround sound theater, all of that stuff. It
Yeah.
is fantastic. But I tried to buy popcorn in the water, which came to less than $20, and I ripped out a $20 bill and they said, "Sir, we don't take cash."
Yeah.
And we're hearing that more and more everywhere, every day. Plastic is preferred, but not the kind of plastic that we, our generation, was raised on, not the credit cards. They want debit cards. That's gotten
Yeah.
us used to things like, and I'm going to bring this back now to HR. Half a dozen companies offering same day, next day pay solutions
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
HR Tech. It's it's no longer a maybe or a possibility. It's actually a competitive advantage in recruiting people to let them know that when they earn their pay that day, they're going to see it in their bank account the next overnight pay.
Yeah. Why
And it
shouldn't
doesn't
they? Right.
well, and it
I mean,
doesn't and it doesn't matter. It
yeah.
really doesn't matter if it's a Federal Reserve note that's underlying it or the gold in Fort Knox. Okay, it really doesn't matter. What matters is it is a legitimate currency that's staked. And again, I did a whole year course teaching people about crypto economy and economics and what that really means. But the stable coin values are out there, backed by what? What's going to stake this? The US Treasury's assets that contain what? Precious metals and land. The real estate in which there's petroleum and mining opportunities for minerals. We have estimated, and it's not my estimate, this is from people much, 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 much more learned than I am in these areas, about $270 trillion of assets in precious metals and mineable and drillable land in the United States. And now, when you start thinking about this quantum financial reset, and now I'm kind of giving away the storyline of the book, I might be jumping to the next to last chapter. This is what we've heard. We've heard universal livable wage come out of one of their mouths right after the election. And in recent months, the monetization of the assets, not on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which, by the way, looks like they're going to lose money this year for the first time ever. And there's a reason for that because there is a financial reset underway. But the assets of the balance sheet of the US Treasury. And that's why you heard so much about taking an inventory of our precious metals and why there's this association going on. So what happens when you find out that you're no longer basing your monetary system on the full faith and credit of a government that everybody thinks is corrupt? Well, now you have it staked with $270 trillion of actual assets. What's that wipe out? Federal debt, consumer debt, education debt. We no longer become a debtor nation of any kind. We become a creditor nation. And again, America is propelled to that level of preeminence, if not ultimate status as the world reserve currency, whatever they call it, in a completely new crypto economy. This is exciting. You and I are going to see this before we go into hospice care.
I hope so. So if I'm an HR technologist, let's kind of bring this back to, because we could go on and on about, all the things that are going on and have nothing to do with HR in some sense. But if I bring this back to the listeners, are there a couple of like specific use cases that you see that they should be paying attention to right now for blockchain and how, just give them some ideas of the things they should be thinking about?
Well, the things that keep them up at night are the things that have kept them up at night for decades. What happens if we can't process payroll? What
Yeah.
happens if our records are inaccessible? What we need to be doing is not turning our departments or our manufacturing, retail, distribution, logistics companies into software development companies again. We need to be working with the software vendors and seeing where they're at in terms of a roadmap to begin incorporating this technology. I was amused by a presentation in Vegas where they were talking about early adopters. Look, HR technology, technobobs are just, we like early technology, right? We're the first ones to get 5G phones. We're the first ones to get the nice 4 megapixel cameras. We like having the best Intel processors on our desk and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
We might even have, like, I have three monitors on my system. I had six at one time, but I've retired, so I've reduced the number of monitors I really need, right? HR people need to be technically fluent, not just technically savvy. You need to be able to articulate clearly your expectations. You've always needed better security. You've always needed better access. You've always needed faster processing, right? And now you need all these transactional activities that you used to do that are remnants of the clerical stage of HR, upgrade it so that they are autonomous and automated. I'll give you a really good example. Business rules. How many applications have people implemented and they have to create the business rules? And it's sometimes such a drudgery that they just surrender to the vendor
They
and
never get it done.
business.
Yeah.
Well, or
Yeah.
they surrender to the vendor's business rules, in which case they now spend a whole lot of time complaining that the vendor doesn't do this and the vendor doesn't do that.
And the product doesn't do what it says they would do, right?
Well, that, oh, I don't even, I gave that joke out in Vegas. The whole software salesman dies and gets to choose between heaven and hell. But the benefit of of an informed HR leadership team is in, yes, have your data analytics people, have your, especially I'm thinking enterprise class organizations. You need to be able to address things like competitive pay processes. You need to be able to address these security issues, all the things you've done before. But we need to set the expectations with our vendors to begin asking them, are you early adopters? What are you building your large language models on? What are you doing in terms of putting under the hood well, really the artificial super intelligence ultimately is what it is, instead of just the artificial general intelligence. What's the application? It looks at your data, it creates the patterns, it understands your policies and procedures, and it begins to optimize the internal processing of that information, making recommendations as to, hey, these are your business rules right now, but you'd have less jeopardy or less legal exposure if you implemented these additional procedures or these additional items in your handbook. And who's reading the handbook? Who's tracking that? I mean, how many people sign off getting their handbook? Yes, I have read. I've received, I've read, and I understand what I've just been given. And there's no proof of that.
Yeah.
There's just their signature on a piece of paper. There's all of this accountability kinds of stuff that now will come up that is really a nightmare for HR people to track. Thus, the proliferation of spreadsheets over the years, regardless of what great system they buy. And now we have the ability to have under the hood a collaborative intelligence that will work with us to help really improve our HR processes, streamline things. Remember what I mentioned, I think, again in Vegas, the average company utilizes about 16 different applications. This might even have come out of a Sapient study at some point. 16 different applications that touch HR. One company
Mhm.
said 20 in my class that day,
Yeah.
and I've heard as many as 25. Well, that's an argument for integrated platforms as a service or iPaaS, but it's also the reason why we need to have good tools underneath the hood that's autonomous or artificial general intelligence. That's really a collaborative intelligence. It goes beyond agentic. It actually works with us. It's analyzing the processes. And I don't need a room full of developers and programmers. The software does that. So the onus is on the large software vendors, and I can drop names as much as you can, right? We got Oracle, we got Ripley, you got UKG, you got Workday. And what's interesting is that there is no dominant player, regardless of what people claim in their marketing literature. None of these companies, not one of them, has more than 9.5% market share. And I haven't seen this year's study, we'll see. But 9.5% market share by the number one company means that there's a lot of people that have much smaller percentages of market share, which means the market is highly fragmented. So
Yeah.
select your vendor, whether it's Darwin in the Box or NetSuite and Oracle, something else like that, and find out immediately what is under the hood or what are they going to put under the hood as this technology evolves, because you are going to be dependent on that. And that's going to be a competitive issue because a company that isn't maintaining its own roadmap, and I'm not talking about the end user community, I'm talking about the software company that's not maintaining and transparently sharing with its user base its roadmap to Web3, is actually going to be a problem, a liability in your company's ability to actually perform in its HR services. And that's a whole nother discussion of global workforce management and what we're going to do in terms of talent acquisition, talent development, and moving forward in this new age what I call the crypto
Yeah.
economy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the thing that you can't, it's easy to get lost in all of the tech side of it and the details and the bells and whistles. At the end of the day, though, if it doesn't move you towards your company goals, like we're in a business to deliver a product or a service to the market, right? And so you can't lose sight of that. That has to be, I mean, that has to underpin your technology strategy. You can't get lost in the tech strategy. If you do, then you'll spend years trying to build something that at the end of the day doesn't necessarily measure up and doesn't move the needle on the business side, right? There are business goals and there are HR goals. The business goals are fundamental. And I think it's easy for us to lose sight of that because we get in there, we want to do this right, we want to do this well. But if we're not thinking about how this improves our ability to deliver our products and services, it's a miss.
That's why alignment's the key. It's not just a word, it's just not a buzz. And the CHRO of the remainder, I believe, of this century needs to be a person who's technically fluent, but understands the importance of that alignment
Yeah.
and maintaining that position with HR. HR is not an ivory tower. I I'm a judge. I've been a judge now for several years of the Impact Awards that Simpler Media does. And I just reviewed my first candidate or application yesterday. And I won't mention names. I won't even shame the awards because Tim might not ask me back next year. But I love reading what practitioners are doing with technology. And the one I read talked about a project they launched 2 years ago that it basically implemented a chatbot to answer frequently asked questions that they were having come in on their direct messaging and in their phone calls. And it was the argument was these are huge distractions and huge time wasters, and they're keeping us from getting our job done. So we created a chatbot. And the bottom line was that the chatbot is being used 3 or 4 times a week. They didn't give me any stats on how many phone calls or DMs they were getting before they did it. But it seemed to me like somebody thought it'd be cool to do a chatbot. Now I gave him a very good score. I didn't give him a perfect score because of the lack of metrics. Tell me what you were really trying to improve and how this did it, or was this just to keep the telephone from ringing in your office? There is still that issue of am I going to avoid the things that I don't want to do and embrace the things I do want to do? That's such a fundamental human nature. And in HR, we're not immune to that. But
Hmm.
if we're pursuing technology as a distraction or a way to avoid what we don't like to do, again, that's a cause of misalignment more often than anything else I see in business. Everybody
Yeah.
needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to understand they're all staffing oars on the same boat, rowing in the same direction. HR is a critical, if not pivotal point, but at the end of the day, we need to be aligned. And a technically fluent CHRO is the person who's going to maintain that, at least from the HR perspective. And frankly, we've got it under control when it comes to ERP and CRM. That you've got the CMO, CSO, you've got the COOC, some manufacturing, production people all online with their systems. In HR, I'm still waiting to see a viable, if not verifiable, book on best practices in HR because every company is unique, every culture is unique, and what is best for one organization may not be best for another. So, what will help us get there are these intelligent engines in AI written on secure platforms, namely the digital ledgers, with the ability to do self and managed services at the fingertips where you need it or in the work center. And I'm going to get paid tonight for doing today's work. That would be really
Why
nice.
shouldn't you? You walk into the grocery store and you get a product and you give them cash for it, right? Like I'm giving you my service. Why shouldn't I get paid when I deliver it?
Right.
That's going to have to be there. It's coming. Well, this has been great, Dennis. I always love catching up with you and having fun, interesting, and sometimes very technical chats about DAGs and DLTs and BLTs, and
Oh,
I'm now
BLT would be
hungry for
nice.
lunch. But in all seriousness, there's a lot here that learn something about it, right? You don't have to be an expert. Know how it's going to impact you in your work and how you can use it to fundamentally improve the things that you're doing in HR tech.
Well, and I I guess the words I gave the people from IRIM who were at HR Tech from our board, okay, and I try to realize and recognize the fact that we're a volunteer board. These are all practitioners in the field.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who's retired but not expired, so I have a lot of time to work on these things, and I absolutely love that. And I'm GSD certified, and if you don't know what GSD does stands for, just direct message me or something like that. But HR people get stuff done, right?
Yeah.
So, you come through that. Dave Ulrich had a beautiful piece today on LinkedIn talking about failure, embracing your failure, why that's important to learn from. So what my marching orders were, if they can even be called marching orders for HR Tech to these board members, was have fun, learn, and make new friends. And if HR can't do that, then we can't expect that of the people that we're helping to service in our organizations or for our
Yeah.
employees. We
Yeah.
need to always maintaining a certain amount of fun about life. I think COVID kind of put a big splash of sunlight on life work balance. And yes, I say life work balance because I'm mindful of the priority of life over work. We don't live to work, we work to live. So that's why I do life work balance. But the other issue is learning. We're not getting off this treadmill. If you expect to be a contributor to commerce in any way, shape, or form, you must commit to lifelong learning. And then that journey, especially for HR tech people, you might be a single person, a sole individual in your organization, or you might be the only HR person in an organization.
Yeah.
You are not alone. And organizations like IRIM are a place for you to make those connections, have people that you can access literally 7 days a week. I don't know anybody who would deny offering free advice, support, or insights on any problems that they might have. And I think that's a genuine and authentic mission, and I'm proud to be the leader of that organization at this time.
Yeah, that's great. Check out IRIM. I think it's a great organization, and what Dennis and the group are building, I think, is going to help all of us be smarter and better and more educated and learned about these things for the future. So go check it out. Also, the annual HR system survey report will be out shortly by the time you hear this podcast. Some of the segments are already out. So I think payroll, HCM, and emerging tech are out and available up on our website at sapientinsights.com. So go check that out. And be sure to listen to Stacy and Cliff next week when they spill the tea on HR tech. Also want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank our producers, the Brand Method Media Group. I want to thank our marketing team who gets this out to you guys every week. And I also want to thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. That is all the time we have for this week's episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a review or subscribe to it so you get this every week when it comes out. You can also drop us a line on the website if you want to chat. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.